So this morning I want to start with a demonstration. Can I have a volunteer? Somebody can. Great. Stand up. Okay, so Ken, I'll get you to hold this. You might want to hold it far away from yourself later on. I'll explain why. Yeah. It hasn't been planned. Okay, so here I've got some paper towel here. We're going to make a fire.
Awesome.
Okay?
Okay.
Okay. And I thought a really flammable thing, the most flammable thing I should find in the shop, an oily, dusty rag. Okay. Just to make it really fun, a little bit of white gas from my stove. Okay? Okay.
Is it too late to rescind my offer?
Yeah, you can hand it to her if you want. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, ready, Ken? Okay. Ready? Whoops. Woo. Some of you breathing a sigh of relief. Okay. This one will work. Okay, wait. What are you feeling at this moment right now? What? Somebody's going, go for it. Other people. Okay, Sally there, I can't believe what's going on. What else are you feeling? Warmth, yeah. Ken's safety, like what's gonna happen? Okay. There's no gas. We're not gonna light it on fire. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Ken. Okay, so that feeling that you just felt, I did it for a reason. Imagine a whole city feeling like that. Jerusalem, around the time of Passover, turned into a tinderbox of tension. In order to understand that, we need to understand some of the geographical and historical things that were going on at this time. So first of all, Passover. Well, it's a feast that was celebrated once a year. And this feast that was celebrated once a year had some really profound implications for the Israelite people. It does have profound implications. So in this Passover, it's the 10th plague that was inflicted upon the people in Egypt. And as the story goes, the people were told to sacrifice a lamb and to put the blood of this lamb on the lintel of the door. And if they did that, then when the angel passed through Egypt, that the angel would not enter it. So on this particular night, the angel passes through Egypt, and if the lintel of the door had a lamb's blood on it, the angel would pass over. But if it didn't, it would enter, and the firstborn child would die, the firstborn son. This is the tipping point for the people in Egypt. It's the point at which Pharaoh can no longer endure, and so he releases his people out of captivity. It's a huge moment in the faith of the Jewish people. So you fast forward to the people living in Jerusalem at this time. And while they're not in slavery like they were in Egypt, things are not exactly pleasant under the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is somewhat fickle, and the Roman Empire definitely wants peace. And so they are kind of living in this delicate hair-trigger environment to begin with. But then you bring in the Feast of the Passover, where the people are said to be freed from their oppression. And what does that do to Jerusalem? They are reminded that they are still living under oppression. And there is a hope that one day they will be free from it. And so at this feast, Jerusalem becomes tense. Because the people there celebrating this feast want to be released from it. And historically, what would happen is that there would be revolts or uprisings during this time. And things in Jerusalem would get very nasty. So the Roman Empire learned their lesson, and about a week before the Passover feast, they would send reinforcements. They would come from a city closer to the sea, or maybe even from Rome, and they would send a couple of authoritarian figures who would parade into Jerusalem on well-trained war horses, followed by hundreds of troops. And the idea was this: you put enough reinforcements in the city over the time of Passover, and everything will be okay. So that was the idea. And we have this incredible story of Jesus. He comes in the story from the Mount of Olives. Now on this map, you might be able to see it. There's the old quarter, and then Mount of Olives is to the east. And so Jesus comes in from the Mount of Olives, and what is he riding? He's riding an untrained colt. So an untrained horse is not exactly a fun thing to ride. And there he is, walking. Now, it's in some iterations of the story, it might even be said that he's riding the colt of the mother who's still there. So there's this mother horse or this mother donkey, and then Jesus isn't riding that, he's riding this colt off to the side. And what happens in this story? Well, he comes in, people are singing, and people are joyful, and they're putting palm fronds on, and they're singing psalms. It's probably a very different environment from what was happening on the other side of the city, where the authoritarian figures are marching in. There's nervous tension as the Roman anthems are played. At this moment in this story, Jerusalem is a tinderbox. This story raises this question: what kind of king do you want? Do you want a king that takes the power that he's given and uses it for his own good? He gives contracts to his friends who he's closest with, and he builds himself a nice house because he can and he's got resources at his disposal. Or do you want a king that uses the power that he has to make the city and the state and the world a better place? Do you want a king that takes the finances and the resources at his disposal and favors himself? He lines his own pockets with it, he flies around on a private jet. Or does he use those resources to change the world? Maybe another way of asking this question is, do you want a Trump or do you want a Mujica? Now, most of you know Trump. I railed on him before. I'm not hesitant to do it again. Way too much coverage for a homophobic, misogynistic racist. I believe that it would be very dangerous if he were to get the candidacy and the presidency. But here's a king of sorts that you may not have heard of before. His name was Jose Mujica. He was the president of Paraguay for 5 years. This is his home. He lived on a farm just outside the city. His salary as president was $4,000 a month, which was 10 times what the average person made. So he decided that that wasn't fair, so he gave 90% of his salary to charity. And he drives a 1987 Volkswagen Blue Beetle. And in the front seat, you'll notice with him a woman. One day, he was driving and he saw a hitchhiker who needed a ride. So Jose Mujica stopped as president of Paraguay and picked up this hitchhiker. Do you want a Trump? Or do you want a Mujica as president, as king? Do you want the empire? Or do you want somebody who rides in on a donkey, who makes fun of the empire? The other thing we need to ask ourselves is, why is Jesus going to Jerusalem? Jesus is an intelligent human being. He knows what happens when you go to Jerusalem. It's the place where prophets are killed. But I think he also knows something very important. That if you're going to make change, you've got to go where the decisions are being made. So there he is, traveling to Jerusalem. Maybe another way of describing what's going on is using the movie Independence Day. How many of you have seen the movie Independence Day? Okay, it's the only movie I've ever woken up to from a nightmare after watching it, even though it's so, on the scale of horror, it's like a 2. So I'll just start playing the clip here. So here's what happens in this movie. The aliens come to Earth in this giant mothership. It comes, and it's got this laser beam that essentially just fries everything in its path. And so this laser beam goes, and it's frying everything. And so, of course, the United States Army is there to try and save the world. And so in this final scene of the movie, it's a spoiler, you're not going to watch it anyways, the fighter pilots are going, and they've launched a few missiles at this thing, but it's got shields, and it's not working. And then comes our protagonist, our hero. And he's got one final missile on his plane. And so he goes to fire it. He sees the target. It's locked in. And he goes, and you might have already seen it. It's like locked. Like, this missile isn't going to fire. And so there's panic. And he tells his other fighter jets to get off to make sure that he's protected. And he heads towards the epicenter of this mothership. So that epicenter, there you see it, it's that glowing orb in the middle. It's where that tractor beam comes out to zap everything. There it is. The missile's not firing. Malfunction, launch failure. So here's what's going to happen. He's going to fly right into the center of it and go up through the beam into the ship. And of course, it explodes. And I have this memory of this from being a kind of this little fighter plane going up into this beam. You'll see him there. If you're a good mouth reader, you'll be able to identify his foul language in a second. There's a reason there's no audio. He looks at his family. There you go. So there he goes. Here's the epic moment coming up. There it is. It's epic. And there it is. So it's a dramatic example, I'll admit. But part of me wonders, is that not what Jesus is doing? He's going into the epicenter. He's going where all the religious authorities are going. He's going into the place where he is, I'm guessing, pretty sure that he's going to face destruction. What I love about this story is it changes our perspective of Jesus. See, when you think of Jesus, you often think of these very intimate moments that he has, right? When he touches somebody, reaches out and heals them. Or he goes and he has this incredible mountaintop experience just with 2 other disciples. But that's not this story. In this story, he heads into Jerusalem on a donkey, being paraded as a king, knowing that what he's doing is a very political act. It still happens today. People still walk towards the Jerusalems of the world. This is Edward Snowden. He saw that what was happening at the NSA was not okay, so he took massive amounts of data and leaked it to the press, and he brought attention to it. But he will never be allowed to return home. And if he is, he will most certainly be arrested and tried for, I'm sure, a plethora of different crimes. In some ways, liken this Jesus guy to Edward Snowden, right? Or Edward Snowden to Jesus, walking towards it, knowing exactly what's going to happen. So I ask the question to you. What Jerusalem are you walking into? Or maybe you're not. Maybe you're turning and going the other way. But sometimes the only way that we can get to the root cause of the problem is to walk into it, knowing what will happen, and hoping for resurrection on the other side.